Chapter 1. The Letter from Chicago. The winter of 1874 had wrapped Chicago in a cloak of ice and coal smoke. Even inside my agency's offices on Washington Street, the draft rattled the windows like impatient fingers tapping for attention. I was bent over my desk, reviewing a ledger of expenses from our New Orleans branch, when the door opened with a hesitant creak. Timothy Gilchrist, my trusted operative, stepped inside, his cheeks raw from the wind. "A messenger just delivered this, Mr. Pinkerton," he said, handing me a sealed envelope. Said it was urgent. The paper was heavy, embossed with the insignia of the Chicago and Northwestern Railway. I broke the wax and unfolded a single sheet. The handwriting was precise, but trembled slightly, as if the writer had rushed under strain. "Mr. Pinkerton, your presence is required with the utmost discretion. A matter has arisen on the overnight service to Milwaukee that may involve both theft and murder. Please come at once to my office at the West Side Terminal. Charles E. Kitteridge, Station Master." I read the note twice, sensing more than professional urgency in the measured words. There is something about the spacing between lines, as if sentences had been carefully crafted to hide what could not be committed to paper. Within the hour, I was stepping down from a carriage onto the snow-dusted platform at the West Side Terminal. Gas lamps flickered against the iron and glass canopy, their light casting long, quivering shadows on the frost. The place had the muffled quiet of a church before a funeral. No hawkers, no laughing porters, only the hollow echo of boots. Kitteridge, a tall man with a black overcoat buttoned to his chin, met me near the ticket windows. His eyes darted to every passerby before he spoke. "Mr. Pinkerton, I thank you for coming so swiftly," he said, voice low. "It is best we speak in my office." Once the door closed behind us, he removed his hat and exhaled, as though the act of speaking in private was a relief. "There was an incident on the northbound express last night," he began. "The train arrived on time, but one passenger did not disembark. A Mr. Jonathan Latham, a grain merchant of some repute. He was found in his compartment this morning dead." "Murder?" I asked. "That is what I believe, though the local coroner might be persuaded otherwise if certain parties have their way." I noticed the careful phrasing, an early sign of politics at play. "What was the cause?" Kitteridge hesitated. "A small puncture just behind his right ear. No gunpowder, no blunt trauma. His valuables were untouched. But there was this." He opened a desk drawer and produced a scrap of fine paper, no larger than a visiting card. On it, drawn in black ink, was a triangle enclosing a single dot. I turned it over. The back was blank. "Who found him?" "Porter named Samuel Ross. Good man, worked the line for years. He swears no one entered or left the compartment after Milwaukee until arrival here." "Where is the body now?" "In the station mortuary." "But there is more." Kitteridge's voice dropped to a whisper. 2 months ago, another merchant, traveling the same route, died in nearly identical fashion. The case was ruled apoplexy. I leaned back, studying him. "Why call me and not the city police?" "Because," he said grimly, "the city police are already in the pocket of the people who may be behind this." Through the office window, I watched a northbound train pull out, its steam clouding the glass. Somewhere in that roil of white and shadow, I felt the first stirrings of the truth, something larger than a simple murder. "I will need the passenger list for last night's express," I told him, "and a quiet word with your porter." "You shall have both," he said. "But Mr. Pinkerton, be careful. I believe whoever did this is still in the city." The wind howled outside, shaking the panes. I slipped the strange triangular card into my pocket, already turning over possibilities in my mind. A silent killer on a moving train, a symbol without name, and perhaps, behind it all, a pattern that had not yet revealed itself. But it would. They always did. Chapter 2. The Porter's Story. The station mortuary was a narrow, windowless room beneath the platform. Gas jets hissed softly along the walls, their glow falling over the covered shape on the central table. The air was thick with the scent of carbolic and cold stone. Samuel Ross stood near the far wall, hat in hand. He was a broad-shouldered man in his 40s, his uniform coat neatly buttoned despite the oppressive heat from a coal stove in the corner. His eyes held the wary look of a man who had already repeated his story to too many ears. "Mr. Ross," I began, "Station Master Kitteridge tells me you discovered Mr. Latham this morning." "Yes, sir. I went to wake him at 7:30. We were due to pull into Chicago in 15 minutes. Knocked once, no answer. Knocked again, still nothing. I opened the door, and there he was." I gestured to the shrouded form. "Had you seen him during the night?" "Yes, sir. He boarded in Milwaukee just before 9. Told me he'd had a long day and wanted no disturbances. Pay me $1 to make sure no one else entered his compartment." "Did anyone?" Ross hesitated, eyes shifting briefly. "Not to my knowledge. I checked the corridor a few times. All quiet." I stepped closer. "Not to your knowledge is not the same as not at all." His lips pressed tight. "Well, there was a young woman, just after we left her scene. She was walking the corridor, said she was looking for the lavatory. I pointed her toward the rear of the carriage. She passed Latham's compartment once, maybe twice, but she never went in." "What did she look like?" "Dark hair, blue bonnet with a ribbon, traveled light, no more than a small carpet bag. I don't recall seeing her after Kenosha." I drew the triangle mark card from my pocket and held it up. "Ever seen this before?" Ross squinted. "No, sir. Looks like something you'd see on a billhead for an insurance firm, or a secret club." He gave a short, humorless laugh. "But I don't mix in such things." I thanked him and asked to see the body. The shroud peeled back to reveal a man of about 50, with the florid cheeks of someone accustomed to good meals and better drink. The tiny puncture behind his right ear was so neat it might have been made by a needle. No swelling, no bruise, only the faintest reddening around the edges. His left hand was curled loosely on his chest. Between two fingers, I noticed a trace of something pale, fibrous, almost like wool. I removed it carefully with tweezers from my case and tucked it into an envelope. It was far too small to be a clue worth notice to the untrained eye, which made it all the more important to me. Ross, watching, asked quietly, "What do you think did it, sir?" "Something sharp and precise," I said, "but not necessarily a blade." We left the mortuary together. Snow had begun to fall outside, softening the noise of the city beyond the station. I was halfway to my hired carriage when a tall, well-dressed man intercepted me. His mustache was trimmed to a fine point, and his fur-lined coat spoke of deep pockets. "You are Pinkerton," he stated, not asked. "That's correct. My name is Wetherell. I represent the Grain Merchants Association. Jonathan Latham was one of ours. The association will see to the funeral and any investigations." "I appreciate your concern," I said evenly, "but the matter is already in my hands." He leaned closer. "Then I will give you a piece of advice, sir. Do not waste time chasing shadows. Latham's death was unfortunate, yes, but the market must remain stable. Loose talk of foul play could cause unnecessary panic." His words were smooth, but there was steel underneath. Before I could respond, he tipped his hat and walked away, vanishing into the steam from a departing train. A young woman in a blue bonnet, a scrap of pale fiber, and now a merchant representative eager to see the matter buried quickly. The web was tightening, but whether it would strangle the truth or reveal it was yet to be seen. Chapter 3: The Woman in the Blue Bonnet. The snow had thickened into a steady curtain by the time I reached the Milwaukee Street boarding houses. It was here, according to Ross's description of the passengers, that a young woman in a blue bonnet had been seen purchasing a ticket south the previous week. The ticket clerk at the station had remembered her, not for her face, but for her manner. She had the air of a person waiting for someone to notice her, he said, rubbing his ink-stained fingers. Kept glancing at the station clock every 30 seconds. With the clerk's vague recollections and the porter's description, I began knocking on doors in the boarding district. By the third house, I struck luck. An elderly landlady in a shawl confirmed that a lodger matching the woman's description had taken a room 2 nights ago and left abruptly that morning. Paid in advance, didn't even wait for breakfast, the landlady said. Carpet bag and all. Funny thing, though, she left a glove behind. She fetched it from a drawer. A fine kid leather glove, its fingertips faintly stained with something dark. Not blood, but ink. Inside, stitched neatly into the lining, were the initials AV. I turned the glove in my hands. Did she receive visitors? Only once. A gentleman, tall, with a silver-headed cane. They spoke in low voices for 10 minutes. He left first. She went out shortly after. What about the bonnet? Oh, that she wore constantly. Indoors, out of doors. I thought perhaps she had something to hide. I thanked the landlady and slipped her a coin before stepping back into the street. Snow clung to my coat as I considered my next step. The initials gave me a thread to pull, but the cane-bearing gentleman intrigued me more. He was no merchant's clerk. I walked to the corner telegraph office and sent Timothy a wire. Trace female passenger blue bonnet initials, AV, also inquire cane, with silver head stop report to office. From there, I paid a call to a quiet tavern near the freight yards, a place where I could buy information without paperwork. Inside, the smell of wet wool and pipe smoke mingled with the tang of ale. At a back table, I found Eddie Sloan, an informant of mine whose memory for faces was matched only by his reluctance to use it without compensation. A tall fellow with a silver-headed cane, Eddie repeated, after I'd laid down the price of his next week's meals. Sure, I seen him 2 nights back. Met a girl in a blue bonnet at the corner of Jefferson and Lake. They walked together, arm in arm, like old acquaintances. Did you follow? Not far. They ducked into the side door of the Elmsworth Hotel. That was interesting. The Elmsworth was not known for respectable guests. The kind of place where questions were discouraged and where a man could vanish without anyone recalling the color of his coat. By the time I reached the hotel, the desk clerk, a sleepy-eyed youth with an ill-fitting waistcoat, informed me that no such guests were presently in residence. We have our registers, he said, but half the names in them aren't real. He was right. A quick scan of the entries from 2 nights ago yielded Mr. and Mrs. Howard, a common alias used by those who didn't wish their business traced. No initials AV, no mention of a cane. As I was leaving, something caught my eye, a scrap of stiff paper protruding from behind the lobby's notice board. I pulled it free. It was a fragment of the same fine stock as the card found on Latham, bearing half of a triangle symbol. The rest had been torn away. So, the woman in the bonnet, the man with the cane, and the strange triangular emblem were connected. But how? And why leave one clue so artfully in plain sight? It was too neat, too deliberate. Back at my office that evening, Timothy returned with news. The initials AV may belong to an Annette Vale, he said. She's been linked discreetly to a private social club called the Triskelion, a gathering of influential businessmen. No women allowed, officially, but she's rumored to run errands for some of the senior members. The name rang no bell, but the triangle on the card, the Triskelion, gave me pause. I had heard whispers of the group before, always in connection with deals struck behind closed doors. If they were involved, then Latham's death was not merely murder. It was a message. Chapter 4. Inside the Triskelion. The Triskelion Club was not marked on any map, nor advertised in any directory. Its entrance lay behind a nondescript brick facade on LaSalle Street, where a brass doorbell hung beside an unmarked black door. I had been here once before, years ago, in pursuit of a swindler who fled before my arrival. This time, I intended to get further inside. Timothy and I arrived dressed for the part. Dark evening coats, polished boots, and silk cravats that would not look out of place among the city's merchant elite. Timothy had secured a borrowed invitation under the name of a recently departed member, a grain factor now touring Europe. In my line of work, borrowed names open more doors than real ones. The doorman, a slab-shouldered fellow with eyes like cold slate, examined the card, then our faces before stepping aside. "Welcome, gentlemen." We entered a hall lit by oil lamps and ornate sconces, their golden light pooling across crimson carpets. Portraits of unsmiling men, founders of railroads, banks, and shipping lines, stared down from the paneled walls. The air was thick with the scent of tobacco and the murmur of low conversation. A steward approached, offering sherry. I declined. My purpose was sharper than any drink could sharpen it. From a main salon came the soft clink of glasses and the drone of a lecture. A tall man stood before a fireplace, addressing the gathered members. His silver-headed cane leaned casually against the mantel. My eyes narrowed. "I need a word with our cane-bearing friend," I murmured to Timothy. "Keep to the edges." The man's name, as I overheard from a nearby whisper, was Dr. Horace Bellamy, a physician with an interest in applied toxicology, which he claimed served both medical and industrial progress. The phrase made my skin tighten. A puncture wound behind the ear could easily be the work of a practiced hand with a needle and the right poison. I drifted closer, feigning interest in a display cabinet of rare coins. Bellamy was describing a selective sedative capable of rendering a man unconscious in seconds without visible trace, save perhaps a faint mark. My mind replayed the sight of Latham's injury. When the lecture ended, the members broke into smaller knots of conversation. I trailed Bellamy to a side lounge, where the woman in the blue bonnet sat waiting. The bonnet was gone, revealing dark hair coiled with precision, but there was no mistaking the curve of her jaw. She rose smoothly to greet him. "Doctor," she said, her voice low, "the shipment leaves tomorrow. The association will have no choice but to—" She stopped as she caught me watching from across the room. Bellamy followed her gaze, his expression unreadable. I turned away, making for the smoking room, but kept them in my peripheral vision. They spoke briefly, then parted. She toward the rear exit, he to the card tables. I decided to follow her. The rear hall was dim, lined with storage cabinets and the faint smell of coal dust. She moved quickly, her carpet bag in hand. Just as she reached for the latch of the back door, I stepped forward. "Miss Vale, I presume?" Her eyes widened, but only for a heartbeat. "You have mistaken me for someone else." "Then perhaps you can explain," I said, producing the glove with the initials AV, "why you left this behind." Her composure wavered. "You have no authority here. I have enough to know that Jonathan Latham's death was no accident, and that you were on that train." Something flickered in her gaze, not guilt, but calculation. "You are in over your head, Mr. Pinkerton. If you value your agency's standing, you will stop asking questions about the Triskelion." She slipped out the door into the snowy alley before I could block her path. By the time I reached the street, she had vanished into the night. When I returned to the club, Bellamy was gone as well. That night, back in my office, Timothy laid a small envelope on my desk. Inside was another triangle card, identical to the first, but this one bore, faintly in pencil, a list of 3 names. The first was Jonathan Latham. The second was partially smudged. The third was mine. Chapter 5, Names on the Card. I stared at the faint pencil marks until the edges of the card blurred. 3 names. One dead, one half erased, one very much alive, my own. The handwriting was neat, deliberate. Whoever had written it had intended the list to be read only by certain eyes, and mine were not among them. The smudge name could have been anyone, but my instincts told me it belonged to the next target, or perhaps the last. Timothy leaned over my shoulder. If they're keeping a death list, you're the final act. Or the second, I said grimly. That middle name matters. We set to work under lamplight, comparing the faint graphite strokes with my files on Chicago's merchant class. A slight curve in the half-erased letters suggested an R or a B. The final trailing line might have been part of an N. It wasn't much to go on. Before I could dwell further, a knock came at the door. A thin man in a porter's cap entered, holding his cap tight in his hands. His name was Avery Parks, a telegraph runner I occasionally use for discreet deliveries. "This came in for you, Mr. Pinkerton," he said, passing me a folded message. The telegram read, "From Kitteridge. Urgent stop, second merchant dead stop, same mark as Latham stop found in room at Grand Pacific Hotel, stop police claim heart failure stop." Another one, and I hadn't even caught the scent of the first murder's killer. I rose at once, coat over my shoulders. "Timothy, bring the card and the glove. We'll need them." The Grand Pacific was a monument of gaslight and polished marble. A hotel that catered to the wealthy men who thought themselves untouchable. The hallways were hushed, but the air carried a tension you could taste. Kitteridge was waiting outside room 412, his face drawn. Name was Robert Benham, grain dealer, had dealings with Latham. Benham lay on the bed, eyes closed as if sleeping, but I recognized the telltale puncture just behind the ear. The coroner's man, a stolid figure in spectacles, was already jotting natural causes into his ledger. "Stop that," I said sharply. "You'll list the cause as undetermined until further examination." The man bristled. "You've no authority here." "Authority is a matter of persistence," I replied, taking a closer look at the room. On the writing desk lay a sealed envelope addressed to Benham, bearing only the triangular symbol. Inside was a railway ticket to Milwaukee for the following night. "A meeting?" Timothy asked quietly. "Or a lure?" I said. "Latham was killed after boarding in Milwaukee. Benham would have been the next to make that trip." Kitteridge frowned. "And a last name?" I slipped the triangle card with the 3 names into my pocket. "We'll find out soon enough. The question is whether they intend to cross it off or start with it." As we prepared to leave, the hallway fell silent. The other guests had withdrawn, doors closing softly like conspirators hiding in plain sight. I couldn't shake the feeling that eyes followed us all the way to the lobby. In the carriage back to my office, Timothy broke the silence. "If you're on their list, you can't keep chasing them without protection." "If I stop chasing," I said, watching the snow blur past the window, "they'll come for me anyway. Better to meet them halfway and uninvited." Back at the office, I spread the clues before us. 2 dead merchants, identical puncture wounds. The woman in the blue bonnet. Dr. Bellamy, master of quiet poisons. The triskelion symbol on cards and envelopes. A list with my name at the bottom. The threads were starting to weave into something larger. But whose hand held the loom? The threads were starting to weave into something larger. But whose hand held the loom? That night, as the last embers in the grate glowed red, a faint sound reached my ears. A metallic click from the alley window. I moved silently to the corner, pistol drawn. The window latch hung open. On the sill rested a fresh card, weighted by a stone. This time there was no list, no smudge, just a triangle and 3 words, written in a firm hand. Tomorrow. Midnight. Alone. Chapter 6. Midnight at the warehouse. The address was not written, but I knew where they meant. Along the river, past the shuttered grain elevators, There was an old warehouse once used for storing timber before the railways claimed most of the freight. Its brick shell leaned into the wind, windows boarded over, and the smell of damp would clung to the air. I arrived at 10 minutes to midnight. The snow was still falling, muting my footsteps as I circled to the side entrance. The padlock on the door hung open, a deliberate invitation. My hand rested on the butt of my revolver as I stepped inside. The interior was a cavern of shadows. Moonlight filtered through cracks in the roof, painting long silver stripes across the dusty floor. Somewhere deeper in the gloom, a lantern burned low, its light barely reaching the stacks of empty crates. A voice floated from the darkness. "You came alone." I recognized it. Low, deliberate, the same measured tone Dr. Bellamy used in the Triskelion salon. "I came for answers," I said. "And perhaps your own name scratched off a certain list?" A figure emerged from behind the crates, coat button high, silver-headed cane in one hand. The lantern's glow caught the glint of metal. Not a pistol, but a slender steel syringe, the kind used by physicians to deliver precise doses. "I suppose you know what killed Latham and Benham," I said. Bellamy smiled faintly. "A compound of my own design. Untraceable after a few hours. Quick, painless. They never knew. Why? They were liabilities," he said simply. "Merchants with influence and debts. The Triskelion protects its own interests. Those who jeopardize them are removed. And now, Mr. Pinkerton, you stand in the same position." Behind him, the faintest shuffle caught my ear. A second figure, smaller, quicker, was moving into position. I recognized her silhouette instantly. Annette Vale. She had her carpet bag in one hand, and from the way she gripped it, I knew there was more inside than clothes. "You've been following me since the train," I said to her, "hoping I'd lead you to whatever you missed." Her eyes narrowed. "You've made this harder than it needed to be. You should have listened when I told you to walk away." Bellamy stepped forward. "I'll make this brief." But he hadn't accounted for the fact that I'd never trusted their invitation. In the shadows behind the far crates, Timothy waited, silent, revolver in hand. We'd arrived together, but parted at the door, each taking a different entrance. Bellamy raised the syringe. I took a step back, forcing him toward the shaft of moonlight where Timothy could see him clearly. "Now," I said. The crack of Timothy's revolver shattered the warehouse silence. The syringe clattered to the floor as Bellamy staggered, clutching his arm. Annette darted for the side door, but I was faster, cutting her off and wrenching the carpet bag from her grip. Inside were 3 more envelopes bearing the triangular symbol, each with a name. None of them were mine, but all were prominent men in the Grain Merchants Association. "You've planned more killings," I said. She glared. It was never personal, just business. The words tasted bitter in the cold air. I bound her wrists with cord from my pocket, while Timothy kept Bellamy covered. We left the warehouse just as the bells in the city struck midnight. The snow swallowed our tracks, but I knew the Triskelions' reach would not melt so easily. Back at the agency, as the two of them sat under guard, I studied the new names. Latham and Benham had been the first, but this was only the beginning. The association, the club, the killings, they were all threads in a tapestry far larger than the room we were in. And I intended to pull every last one until the whole thing came apart. Chapter 7. The Man Behind the Curtain. By morning, Bellamy and Annette were in the custody of men I trusted. Not the city police, who could be persuaded by coin, but operatives from my own agency. They were moved to a secure location on the outskirts of Chicago, away from prying eyes and sympathetic ears. Annette refused to speak. Bellamy, his arm bound from the bullet wound, maintained a calm, almost bored expression. "You'll find the Triskelion has no head to cut off," he told me. "It is a circle. Remove one man, another steps in." I'd heard the boast before. from smugglers, from counterfeiters, from thieves who thought a name on a door meant leadership. But there is always someone at the center, even if they hide behind a dozen layers of protection. The 3 new names from Annette's carpet bag became my starting point. Morton Hale, Chester Rollins, and Elias Pratt. All merchants with considerable sway over grain shipments moving through the Great Lakes. Within hours, Timothy had traced their business dealings to one man. Charles E. Kitteridge, the very station master who had summoned me to investigate Latham's death. The realization sat like cold iron in my gut. Kitteridge had positioned himself at the heart of the rail connections, able to route, delay, or conceal shipments at will. If the Triskelion intended to manipulate the grain market, they would need someone exactly in his position. I decided to confront him before word of Bellamy's capture reached his ears. The West Side terminal was quieter than usual when I arrived. Kitteridge was in his office, bent over a timetable. He looked up, all cordial smiles. "Mr. Pinkerton. Progress, I hope." "Progress enough to know the list of names points back to you." The smile didn't falter, but his eyes cooled. "You've been misled. My interest in this matter is purely civic." "Civic interests rarely involve poisoning 2 of your own associates," I said. "Bellamy and Annette Vale are under lock and key. They've told me enough to know you're the one choosing who lives and who dies." For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he set down his pen and folded his hands. "You don't understand, Pinkerton. The market is a fragile thing. One careless man, one dishonest broker, can topple an entire season's profit. I remove those risks. Quietly, efficiently, and you keep their shares for yourself." His thin smile returned. "A necessary incentive. You see, I have built something here, a network that keeps Chicago's grain trade steady. Without me, chaos." "You mistake tyranny for stability," I said. He rose, smoothing his coat. "You can't prove anything. Not without the testimony of people who won't live long enough to give it." That was when the door behind him opened and Timothy stepped inside, followed by 2 armed operatives. "They'll live long enough," I said. "Long enough to speak under oath." Kitteridge's face hardened. For a moment, I thought he might reach for the revolver in the desk drawer I'd already spotted earlier, but he was smart enough to know 3 guns against 1 was poor arithmetic. As we escorted him out through the terminal's back hall, I noticed the station's massive clock striking the quarter hour. Its steady chime echoed through the empty concourse, and I thought about Bellamy's words, that the Triskelion had no head. Perhaps that was true in theory, but I now had 3 of its hands and 1 of its eyes. With the right pressure, the rest of the body might follow. Still, as we loaded Kitteridge into the carriage, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were walking into the second act, not the final curtain. Men like Kitteridge rarely worked without someone even higher pulling the strings. And the faintest suspicion in my mind, one I did not yet voice to Timothy, was that the Triskelion's true architect was still free, watching, and waiting for me to make my next move. Chapter 8, The Final Hand. Snow still clung to the streets 3 days later, but inside my office the air was stifling with the smell of coal smoke and ink. Bellamy, Annette, and Kitteridge were secured and ready for questioning before a federal magistrate, a venue far less susceptible to Chicago's local corruption. Yet the sense of something unfinished gnawed at me. The Triskelion had been wounded, but not broken. I could feel the weight of unseen eyes each time I stepped outside. That morning, Timothy placed a sealed envelope on my desk. Messenger brought this. No return address. I slid it open. Inside was a single playing card, the King of Spades, and in the center, the triangle symbol inked in precise lines. Below it, in block letters, "You've taken the bait. Now, come to the table." The location was scrawled beneath. The Merchants Exchange, Midnight. The exchange was a grand building in the heart of the city, its trading floor empty at night, its balconies dark. At the appointed hour, I entered alone, my revolver heavy in my coat pocket. Gaslight flickered across the cavernous room, casting long shadows over the polished floorboards. A single figure waited at the far end, seated in a high-backed chair, gloved hands resting on a silver-topped cane. It was not Bellamy, not Kitteridge. It was Wetherell, the Grain Merchants Association representative who had advised me to drop the case on my first day. "Mr. Pinkerton," he said, his tone almost cordial, "I see you've met some of my associates." "Associates who are now in custody," I replied. He gave a thin smile. "Expendable. The Triskelion is not a collection of men. It is an idea. One that keeps order in a world where markets can rise or fall on rumor. We remove the weak links, and in doing so, keep the chain from breaking. You call it order. I call it murder." He rose, leaning lightly on the cane. "You've disrupted our work, but you've also shown me you could be valuable. I could arrange for your name to be erased from certain lists. You'd leave with your agency intact and your men unharmed." I stepped closer, the echo of my boots filling the empty hall. "You think I'd join you? I think you understand power when you see it." I let him see the faintest curl of a smile. "Dull," which is why I brought some of my own. From the shadows above, two of my operatives stepped onto the balcony, rifles trained. Wetherell's eyes flicked upward just as Timothy emerged from behind the trading floor's columns. "This building is surrounded," I said. "Your carriage is waiting outside, courtesy of the federal marshal." For the first time, his composure cracked. He moved for the cane, and I realized the top unscrewed, a blade hidden inside. But before he could draw it, Timothy was on him, wrenching the weapon free. Within minutes, Wetherell was in irons. By dawn, sworn statements from Bellamy, Annette, and Kitteridge tied the murders of Latham and Benham directly to Wetherell's orders. The Triskelion's network of influence unraveled faster than I had expected, its members scattering like leaves in a high wind. And yet, the symbol still sat on my desk. A triangle with a dot in its center, its meaning older than any grain market, older than Chicago itself. Wetherell might be gone, but there would be others. Men in other cities, with other names, who thought themselves keepers of order. As the winter light seeped into my office, Timothy came in with a morning paper. "You've ended it," he said. I looked at the headline, "Merchant's Murder Plot Exposed by Pinkerton Agency," and shook my head. "No, Timothy. We've ended a chapter. The book is still being written. Welcome to Mystery Cafe, your ultimate stop for gripping detective stories, chilling mysteries, and unforgettable investigations. Here, every video serves a fresh dose of suspense, shocking twists, and cases that challenge your inner detective. From classic whodunits to modern crime stories, we bring the world of mystery straight to your screen, where every clue matters and no secret stays buried for long. Before we start unraveling today's mystery, we'd love to know, where are you watching from? Globe showing Europe, Africa. Drop your country, city, or stay in the comments, and let's see how far the Mystery Cafe family reaches. Magnifying glass tilted right.